Hey team, Matt Young from FSQ Coaching with 10 tips or considerations to increase your coaching acumen in practice and games. Tip number 1, what kind of game day coach are you? Great coaches during game day observe, analyze, and give really pointed feedback when players come off the bench when they can have it, when they can really process it. Inefficient coaches are yelling and screaming and putting undue pressure on overwhelming players. So really, during the games, the great coaches are observing and analyzing, and you'll see them often writing notes, which then informs what they're going to work on in practice, which dovetails nicely into tip number 2. Work, practice, observe games. So by analyzing the scenarios, coaches can identify the areas for improvement and tailor the training sessions to what they saw happening in the game scenario. Pretty common sense. Work the practice and observe the games. Point number 3, or consideration number 3, what are the 2 places where practice input should come from? Well, number 1 we just discussed was what was happening in the games. And then number 2, where are those players on their development pathway? Is it age and stage appropriate? But where are they? Those are the only 2 places that your practice input should come from. What you're observing in games, happening and not happening, and what you're on in terms of a pathway in development. Constructive feedback in practice versus games. The practice lends itself to that kind of setting. It's a more intimate, it's smaller. If you've established that communication at the outset and the difference between constructive, positive, and negative feedback, which you should do, we should be giving all the constructive feedback during the practice. Not in the game setting where the players are there with their teammates, with their parents, with their opposition teammates, with their opposition parents. That can become overwhelming and force players to shut down, and we don't want to do that. Tip number 5, no laps, no lines, no lectures. Attention spans are increasingly smaller, and we really want to ensure that we're getting fun and games and movement and activity into practices as much as possible. Even in our drills, we don't want to have people in a long lineup so they're taking a turn and then they have to wait to take another turn. We can always mirror, do 2 things on opposite sides, or break things down into 4s so that people get more touches, more time on task, etc. No laps, no lines, no lectures. Number 6, unopposed movement is largely inefficient. It doesn't replicate the game scenario. So lining up against air and doing things against air with no opposition isn't that effective. Try to work in opposed opposition and opposed situations and scenarios to give your players that real-time game feedback. Coach what's in front of you. Number 7. A lot of times we'll show up, kids are tired, maybe they had an exam, maybe it's a day after Halloween or a holiday. We really have to adjust and pivot our coaching style to what is in front of us right then, because otherwise it's not going to work, it's not going to be effective. Coach the interaction with the same frequency as we coach the activity. We're really good at coaching the activities. Okay, everyone, now move to this drill. Make sure we're coaching that interaction. Success in game scenarios is contingent on players collaborating, working together, communicating. If we don't coach that during practice, it's not likely to show up during the game. So make sure we identify it and coach it with the same regularity that we coach the activity. Build in decision-making. If your practice does not include an element of decision-making, it is an ineffective practice, because decision-making is crucial to life and sport, because that's what we're doing almost every play, every day in sport. So make sure that we've built in decision-making and asking versus just telling and dictating and yelling and creating robots, because that's ultimately going to create better athletes and better people. And last but not least, tip number 10, or consideration number 10, peer-to-peer feedback is the most impactful feedback that you can deliver. Why? Because kids and players respect their teammates' feedback more than they respect the constant coach's feedback or their parents' feedback. So set up situations like that for players to collaborate and work together and share each other's feedback. So there you have it. 10 quick tips. You don't have to use all 10 at once. Start with the one that resonates with you, and you can go out and create better practice and game experiences for your players, your parents, your co-coaches, and elevate the level of the game.